It sort of sounds like they're working exactly as intended. They're working exactly as designed, but those designs just haven't taken into account that there is perhaps more going on for a lot of people.
I think people only see the impact on trans and non-binary folks, which is an important impact to observe and record and do something about. But then they don't realize that their frontline staff are also really stressed. And
Right.
they feel almost like they've been trapped, right, by this imperfect setup.
Systems are something that most of us don't really think about very often. They're just sort of there in the background in the forms that we fill out, the names that appear on screens, or information that employees rely on to do their jobs efficiently. But when those systems aren't designed with trans and non-binary people in mind, they can end up inadvertently outing them. And that's what we're talking about today. The ways that systems can put trans and non-binary people in uncomfortable or sometimes even unsafe situations by publicly outing them as trans, often without anyone intending to, and certainly not with the permission of trans people themselves. Sometimes something as simple as a name field in a form can have a much bigger downstream effect than most people expect. And it isn't just trans people who are affected. They also put frontline staff in really difficult positions while trying to do the right thing, trying to do their job with systems that don't quite work. I'm super lucky, as always, to be joined by my colleague Kai. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm freezing cold because I didn't
Yeah.
put my heating on until we sat. Like, I forgot to turn it on, so I'm now in a freezing cold house. So
you
I'm
might
okay
be
there.
moving a little extra to keep warm.
I'm going to be wriggling a lot in this episode, yes.
Fair enough. We understand.
I'm glad. So when we talk about systems accidentally outing people, I imagine that a lot of people would never have considered that when they come to work with Transfocus. Sorry, mainly because systems are just sort of implemented into our life. It doesn't kind of occur to some people that it doesn't work for everybody, I guess.
Right.
And so when we're talking about systems that accidentally out people, what do we actually mean by that? And I mean, I'm going to grill you for details later on, but just in general, why do those moments happen and what does that actually look like?
Yeah, to kind of set the stage for what this is all about. So yeah, we have information systems that store all kinds of information, whether on the employee side with human resources systems or on the customer side, if there's like a profile that people create or that the company or organization creates, doesn't matter, but essentially storing critical information, name, address, date of birth. In some systems, they record sex or gender and or gender. And so it's all these pieces of information. Oh, another one is titles. So Mr., Ms., Mrs., MX, and so forth. And those are important details to understand about an employee or a customer or both. And they often have insufficient fields, especially for the dynamic and or varied experiences of trans and non-binary folks. And so depending if there's enough fields or the right protocols around the fields, unfortunately, especially when they say, for example, a legal first name, oftentimes that's the focus of a lot of systems. Unfortunately, then that's what staff use when they interact with an employee or a customer, and then as a result, either misgender them or misname them, which is kind of critical for interacting with a person.
Right.
Their name, like that's number one. And so that can be often the first touch point that then sets up like just a cascade of negative interactions going forward, or at least hesitation or nervousness from the trans and non-binary person.
It sort of sounds like they're working exactly as intended. They're working exactly as designed, but those designs just haven't taken into account that there is perhaps more going on for a lot of people. And so you described kind of the setup, but then in terms of trans and non-binary people, what does that look like in terms of the downstream effect of those systems being set up in that way?
Right. Yeah. So there's the kind of collection of this information, and then there's the uses of the information. That's a
Right.
kind of a good way to think about it, because oftentimes organizations are focused on the collection, but then don't give as much thought to how staff in particular are going to use that information and what they're
Mm.
relying on to interact with folks. And it's also, there's two other aspects of like interacting one-on-one with that individual, like the staff person with the trans and non-binary person, and then
Yeah.
there's the like staff announcing in a busy room, or maybe not even
Right.
busy, but like a kind of more of a public setting of there are
Mm.
more people who might be in earshot of that conversation or announcement. So I'll give a few examples just to make it clear. And so I'm talking about the kind of use and, like you said, the downstream effects. So a staff sees in the information system, okay, this person goes by Tom, as what we typically attribute to be a man's name.
Mm.
And then either one-on-one with that person will use that name, and it's not the correct one for that person. Perhaps they
Mm.
go by Isabella. And so that will be quite hurtful or harmful to that person. Of course, it varies by individual, what level of harm that is for them. But it is a kind of a disruptive moment to that
Yeah.
interaction. It gets even more challenging when certain organizations will use first names to announce, to kind of call that person into a
Mm.
service, especially
Right.
in a waiting room. And so that's
Mm.
where the staff is just going about their regular work. It's no fault of their own, but then they'll announce that name. They'll say, Thomas or Tom, please come to the desk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that will put that trans individual who goes by Isabella in a very difficult spot. So are they going to come up and respond to that name? Maybe they look different than one would expect for a name such as Tom. And so that essentially outs them to the people in the waiting room, or at the very
Right.
least creates kind of a like, curiosity. Is there an
Mm.
error here? What's going on? It kind of stands out to people. And so that puts that person in a tough spot. And so we don't think about systems the way they're set up, having these cascading impacts, whether one on one with that person or in a group setting, like I've
Mm.
described in the waiting room.
If it's okay with you, I kind of want
Mhm.
to dive a little bit deeper into that because I can imagine, or I can sort of, okay, I work in the sort of social media area of
Mm.
for Transfocus, and I can already feel the comments
Mm.
of, well, it's not that big of a deal. Like it's somebody's calling out the wrong name, and yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable, but like it's not that big of a deal. But actually, being misgendered and being misnamed, especially if it's a contrast in terms of expectations versus
Mhm.
what your actual gender is and how you look. It's so much deeper than just a bit
Mhm.
uncomfortable for a lot of people. For some people, maybe not so much, but
Right.
it can be very serious in terms of not just,
Mhm.
but well, in two areas. First, how people feel about themselves, and also the danger that it could potentially put them in. And so, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind going into that a little bit more.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. It's really important to note the severity of this type of thing, and it's not just one instance of it. The thing is that
Right.
this is essentially on repeat in many different organizations, because this is a system flaw that is built into a lot of systems, kind of not geographic specific or sector specific. It's just everywhere essentially. And so
Mm.
this isn't just a one-time occurrence. This is over and over and over.
Mm.
And for some, it's jarring to hear one's past name. Typically, for many trans and non-binary folks, there is a bit or a lot of pain associated with one's past name. This is an essentially one of many markers of misunderstanding about somebody's gender based on how
Yeah.
they were born. They were given a particular name, and that was not a correct name based
Mm.
on their gender. Of course, that is an innocent mistake that people made back then, and can be corrected. But if that corrected name is not kind of taken up by the organization, then that can put people in a particular a precarious place, especially when it comes to other people, because,
Mm.
of course, in our society, being trans or non binary is still very much stigmatized. So it could actually put somebody in harm's way, like physical, emotional, you name the level,
Yeah.
because trans is a bit of a flashpoint right now. And so people have no qualms in some instances to be in trans and non binary people's face,
Hmm.
and, share their opinions or, harm them in some way. And so this is not a small matter. Like, there are physical consequences. And also, even if it doesn't rise to that, which albeit is rare, it can also just have an emotional impact for folks who might get extra stares or comments or whispers. Sometimes there are whispers, which anybody thinks about their experience of something, even not related to gender, we all feel that, like
Yeah.
that social exclusion, and it's
Hmm.
awful. Nobody likes that. And so just thinking about it from that perspective hopefully is helpful to try to
Hmm.
mitigate for that in some way.
And I would imagine that perhaps there's a lot of anticipation, like waiting for something to go wrong. And
Mm,
then
yeah.
when it does, it's like, ugh, this extra.
Hmm.
So you're already fearful. And then the interaction goes exactly the way that you're fearing. It must
Hmm.
be a pretty horrible experience.
Yeah.
And it would probably make people avoid, if possible, they would avoid going to those places where that might
Yeah.
happen.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, how bad is it? Am I
Yeah.
enough pain? Do I have enough troubles that I need to go and do this? But if it doesn't kind of clear a threshold, people will definitely avoid. And we have a lot of stats to support that. That avoidance is a huge strategy, understandable strategy, given some of the consequences. And people are doing this very complex calculus, real
Mm.
time in their heads. And yeah, it's really sad in that regard. People don't know because avoidance, you can't kind of register
Hmm.
as an organization, it's less visible. But that definitely is at play.
Hmm. So when we're thinking about those systems, or not thinking about them actually, when we're just sort of carrying on as sort of the status quo, just like plodding along with the system that we already have, um, I would imagine that there is a lot of invisible labor that goes into this sort of thing for trans people because, well, as you know yourself, having set up Transfocus, that
Mm-hmm.
you're probably best placed to see the problems. And so
Yeah.
what does that look like when we sort of just go, well, someone will say something if it's an issue? And like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what can people do who are not trans to try and like
Mm-hmm.
alleviate that if they're
Mm-hmm.
not maybe in control of the system themselves, but they
Right.
notice an issue that comes up for them, especially frontline staff who are dealing with this more often.
Oh, yeah. I mean, frontline staff are doing heroic efforts in many organizations where they're handling very complex matters with usually not a lot of guidance from the organization. And they're
Mm.
seeing firsthand the impacts, and none that they intentionally try to create. It's just, it happens, right?
Right. Yeah.
And usually fast paced too. Like, things need to happen immediately and quickly. Depends on the organization or the sector. So yeah, my heart really goes out to frontline workers, and often caught in between, this kind of not addressing or not setting things up properly, and then the customers or the employees. And so when somebody observes something, I understand why staff want to help out, but also
Mm.
don't feel maybe it's their place,
Right.
or maybe they don't have all the information to be able to say something.
Mm.
And in those instances, I would very much encourage folks to say things. And it's okay to speak from your position of like, I felt awful when I didn't use the correct name because we don't have a
Mm.
second field for me to know that name. And because I think people only see the impact on trans and non-binary folks, which is an important impact to observe and record and do something about. but then they don't realize that their frontline staff are also really stressed, and
Right.
they feel almost like they've been trapped, right, by this imperfect setup. And again, not organizations are not doing this intentionally, but
Mm-hmm.
I think just being able to say, "Hey, this happened. I didn't feel great about it. I wasn't sure what to do." Like the expressing the uncertainty, I think, is helpful. And I will say that a lot of the times when we get called in is by staff saying something, um,
Right.
because they're like, "Hey, we need to deal with this. This is the fourth time in a month that this has happened," or whatever
Mm-hmm.
information they can give to say there's a frequency to it, and that without resolving it, it will continue to be an issue. And not to say that everything ends up in the legal landscape, but there certainly is, that is a factor in the decision making, particularly here in Canada. These
Mm-hmm.
are human rights issues, and so don't need to be hostile or mean about it with leaders, but just like, hey, this is happening. And especially if you have a bit of information about frequency, what happens in those instances more broadly, and you don't have to have ideas for how to solve it. You can say, this is how I addressed it in the interim. I wrote that person's name in the comment section or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can give people an idea of like, okay, we can deal with the interim. Maybe we need a long-term solution, and then the leadership can take next steps from there.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want, well, I have a question that seems like an obvious question to ask, but I'm hesitant to ask it because
Okay.
it's so layered. This is the kind of work that you actually do with organizations. So I wanted to ask about what can be done then. But I
Yeah,
realize that that's so broad and it depends on what the issues are. So
for
I
sure.
was wondering if you could at least give me some information on that.
Right. The broad strokes of
Sure.
just the options available. I mentioned there's kind of three main categories when it comes to systems. There's the first name, there's the titles, if they exist, Mr., Ms., MX, and so forth. And then there's gender data collection, if that exists.
Mm-hmm.
So, more often than not, most systems are dealing with the first name issue. And then a few others have these added pieces of the titles and the gender data collection. It gets even a little bit more complex when you're in a healthcare system with sex and gender, right? That's where
Mm.
things get real tricky. So I won't delve into that, but we do have experience handling that nuance. So and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be done very carefully. But and a lot of, especially in some provinces, requiring pay equity reporting. So gender data collection is a part of that. So it is important and a little bit more widespread to be collecting gender along with equity objectives and whatnot. All of that to say, when it comes to first name, we do need more than just one field. Uh, there, I understand the importance of legal first name, especially if you're paying an employee or there's a legal matter with customers. Totally get it. Most trans people also understand that. But if
Mm-hmm.
it's not accompanied with another field for chosen first name, that can be very limiting and, again, make things difficult for frontline staff. And I think there's broader benefit to adding a second field because many non-trans people or cisgender people have nicknames. And the degree that you can speak to that, um, that's really important as well. So yeah, there's that. And then there's also titles, Mr., Ms., MX, and so forth. You can ask yourself as an organization, do we need these? That's a
Mm.
very good first question to ask. Some organizations are very formal, and so understandable that there's a need for that, but then making sure you have enough options available. And then gender data, especially if it's required, particularly if it's legislatively required, it's just making sure that you have enough options there. But if it isn't
Mhm.
required legislatively, then also asking, similar to titles, do we really need to collect this? What are we using it for?
Mm.
Some of the questions you can ask to start to explore the different options.
Have you got experience having, I'm asking for gossip now, of course. Have you experienced this yourself when it comes to systems?
Too many times to
Mm,
count. Yeah, a
I
lot.
can imagine.
And yeah, and of course, I shared by many other trans and non-binary folks. Like this is not unique to me. And yeah, I'm happy to share a bit from my experience. The two big so I'll talk about when I first came out, which was probably the most frequency,
Mm,
and then I'll talk about the things that I continue to experience even today. Um, and when I first came out, the way I present now is different, right? I looked
mm,
more feminine in terms of my expression and also the shape of my body and whatnot. And so people read me in a particular way if they were interacting with me, like one on one, face to face. And so, yeah, there was a lot of misgendering. And also, I hadn't updated my documents officially because it took a year and a lot of money. And so, it's just not really possible to do it really quickly.
right.
And so, yeah, in certain healthcare settings in particular, I would be in a waiting room and then they would call out my previous name. And it was really jarring, even
Yeah.
though I was, kind of more recently shifting away from that name. It still like was a gut punch every time. Because one, I was worried about what other people heard or saw or how they're going to react. Just very hyper vigilant,
Mm,
and for understandable reasons, because
of course.
um, trans people are not always treated very well, and so there's like that kind of like, what do I do? Some part of me, and some people do this. They walk out, right? And because they don't want to interact with that name, it's not the proper one, and so they don't
Mm,
respond to it, and they will forego care. For me, I did usually go up and then just be like, hey, is there any way to document this? I'm still changing my document. So I try to like work with them and let them
yeah.
know. But, it's a huge amount of advocacy when you're trying to
Yeah.
take care of taking blood or getting hormones or, whatever the thing, maybe I hurt my arm, like it's just, there's already things to address, and then you're having to then on top of that deal with the name. It's a lot.
Mm,
And so it was very discouraging, very disheartening, and depending on where I was at mentally that day, it could stay with me for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, so
mm,
it has more than just the impact of that moment. It then you kind of replay in your head and be like, oh, was that person sitting next to me? What did they think? Or did I handle that well enough? Did they actually listen? Will it happen next
mm,
time? Just like on and on and on. And so it's really hard. So
mm,
that's back when I was coming out as trans. And what happens these days is not so much face to face interactions. Most people make the correct assumptions about, I've changed my name legally, so it's in the system. Usually the past name is not visible anymore after however many years. Uh, and also, I look how my people expect my gender, right, as a man.
mm,
But what will happen now is that over the phone, for whatever reason, uh, probably because people on the phone do have access to my past name, and perhaps the pitch of my voice is a little bit higher than they would expect for a man. And so they do continue to misgender me on the phone. They'll call me Miss Scott, they'll call me ma'am, call me all this stuff, right? They don't typically use my past name, although that has come up a few times too. So it's just like, oh, and that's
yeah.
that's super disorienting because I'm like, who are you talking about? I'm like,
Right.
oh, they're talking about me. Okay, I was not used
Right.
to it, right? Having
Right.
be properly gendered everywhere except for here is like very disorienting. Yeah.
I can imagine. I'm so
Mhm.
sorry that that happens. Oh my
Mm.
goodness. That
Oh, thank you.
feels, I can imagine, super jarring,
Hmm.
especially after such a long time. And I know it's uncomfortable at the beginning, but I think maybe there's a level of like, okay, haven't, it's like
Yeah.
terrible, but I haven't done X, Y, and Z yet. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, now further along, and that's just like shows how long things
Mhm.
stay in systems, and like
Oh, yeah.
how hard it is to actually shift that after such a long
Mhm.
time. And I think maybe one of the things that people don't necessarily realize is how long it does take to update your records in the first place, like on a legal basis. So having, it's not just a simple case, well, yeah, just change your name and then the system will be updated. It actually takes a
Right.
long time, and it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of effort to get that all changed.
Absolutely. And the data shows us that because of these realities, these bureaucratic, what I call nightmares, you need like a part-time job to
Right.
freaking change things. And so we see from the data that the majority of trans and non-binary folks have not changed their documentation, not
Mm.
for a lack of desire or will, just huge barriers to that. And in some jurisdictions, particularly down in the United States and other countries as well, you have to go to court to change your name. And
Right.
so you have to publicly put it in a newspaper to, let people know, air quotes. And it's just like, what? You're going to put people in that kind of harm's way? It's
Yeah.
bananas. So there's immigration considerations for a lot of folks, especially if they're refugees.
Mm.
So it's just like, or there's a marital status thing at play in countries where it's not accepted. So it's just like on and on and on and on. It's just
Hmm.
super difficult to change one's name, first name in particular. Sad, interestingly, last name, no problem for women,
Right.
that is.
One of the things that I kind of wanted to ask,
Mm,
on our YouTube account, we've got a video of you reacting to
mm,
a really great example of this kind of systems issue,
yeah.
from the show The Pit. And I was going to ask you to briefly go into that, and I can link the full video in the show notes. But before I do, one of the things I also wanted to ask within that is
Mm,
that in the comments of the original video of that
right.
clip, somebody had written in the comments, "Oh, but in a healthcare setting, you know you need this information.
Mm,
You need to know that this
right.
person, is actually this
Yeah.
sex," and that's something that I think maybe a lot of people could get stuck. Is that
Hmm.
there are times where you do actually need to know somebody's sex at birth,
Mm,
and in most cases, though, you don't. And so I
right.
was wondering if you could talk about that specifically before going
For sure.
into.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Before going into the reaction video, yeah, I'll
Mhm.
I'll speak briefly, although there's a lot that could be said
I
about
also appreciate that.
sex.
Apologies.
Yes, of course. There's like, what are we talking about? Sex at birth, legal sex.
Right.
What one's characteristics are at present.
Hmm.
There's so many different ways that we talk about anatomy, and what is useful in a particular instance. Obviously in healthcare, I understand and appreciate why we're kind of focused on sex, or the medical community, healthcare providers and whatnot really are anchored into sex, because it
Hmm.
does cascade to blood tests and different types of diseases and health factors and testing, and the list is long, right?
Right.
So I appreciate how it's been set up. And for some trans and non-binary folks, they don't have issue with providing their sex at birth, for that kind of sex-specific healthcare, especially if they have not undertaken any gender affirming care, or even if they have, they sometimes are
Hmm.
okay with it. Now, that said, I do find that sex is so broad that,
Right.
just two categories, which doesn't fit everybody because there are intersex folks. And so it is limiting and doesn't give everybody, especially healthcare providers, the information that they really need, and often, right? And so
Hmm.
that's where there might be more value in, mm, either expanding it or having a little bit more specifics. So say for example with somebody female assigned at birth, they often, the healthcare professionals just blanketly assume that they have a uterus, and I'm like, that's not always going to be the instance. And it's
Right.
not even trans-specific, right? So
Mhm.
it does not serve fully. And I think there are probably ways that we can improve upon the existing setup that would not only help trans and non-binary folks, because I think it is important to know the presence or absence of things,
Yeah, of course.
of different parts. So, but it'll also help cisgender folks. So it's just, yeah, being a little bit more thoughtful around it and not so kind of unifocused on sex alone.
Well, I think that so many cisgender women could really relate to that because
Mm-hmm.
uh, I don't know about everybody, but certainly my experience has been that often if there's a health concern, it will be quite often dismissed as like, oh, it's probably your period. It's probably
Right.
related to you. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe, but also maybe not. And it would be
Yeah.
nice to not have everything, oh, you are this
Yeah.
gender, you were assigned this sex at birth, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
every single problem you have is related to your ovaries.
Oh
And
my
it would
God.
be really great if we could actually separate that and look at healthcare from a more individual
Yeah.
basis and not make blanket assumptions based on somebody's gender or sex assigned at
Oh,
birth.
yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
a lot of people can relate to that's sort of
Yeah.
separate to the fact that they are or are not trans, I would
Absolutely.
imagine.
Yeah. So well put. And I see that in various comments that we follow and, research and whatnot. And I do think we're headed there more
Sure.
generally. And so that's good news for just about everybody. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited for that type of future. But we have a few more steps to get there.
Sure.
Yeah,
So we can
yeah.
relax on sex assigned at birth, perhaps.
Right, 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 right. And loosen the grip of it at the very least, right?
Sure.
Because right now it's just like,
Right.
and people are very, very into it. And I appreciate
Hmm.
it. I'm not discounting it, but there's maybe a few more things we can add in the mix. Just a thought. So, yeah.
Sure. So we do, as I mentioned, we do have that reaction video of that scene from the pit, and I was wondering if you, I mean, we do have a longer video, it's like 12 minutes long on this, but would you be able to just sort of loosely go into that, and I can share it in the show notes?
Yeah. Yeah, we put this together and looking to do other reaction videos too. So, but just I think there's something missing often in terms of what the interaction looks like. Like you can in all the training describe like how to do it, but then sometimes there's value in seeing kind of scene by scene. And
Mm.
thankfully, the pit had a really good example of interactions in the healthcare system. Obviously, not just for healthcare, they're more broadly applicable, and this is a trans patient coming into the emergency room having hurt, I think it's her arm, if I remember correctly,
Hmm. Yeah.
and having interaction with the front desk in terms of calling her up to get care. And then also interactions with healthcare professionals. And each one shows a slightly different version of how either a positive or maybe a little bit more kind of dismissive, maybe neutral interaction. And we just kind of point out why one versus the other is better, and why especially one of the doctors like had just the best response. And you can kind of see the emotion of it from the trans person's perspective, and people stepping up to the plate as really strong
Hmm.
allies. So it's really wonderful. I really appreciate it. One thing I wanted to add, which is not in the reaction video, but it's good to add here in the mix. It goes back to the one of the comments made on the that you mentioned about verification. So sometimes you were like, we need legal first name because that's how we
Hmm.
verify people. And I'm like, yes, I totally understand verification. So whatever those points are, date of birth, legal first name, it's fine to um, but it's how you deal with it interacting with somebody who has a different name. Um, and you can do that by saying, hey, this is what I have here for legal name. Is this correct? You don't have to say it out loud as an example. And then just really focusing in on the chosen first name for any verbal communication. So I think just having people kind of reorient on how they use names is really important as part of that process.
So just to clarify, if you have somebody's legal name, and then they also have another field for
Mhm.
a preferred name or chosen name or whatever you would like to call it.
Yeah.
And then always defer to that and
Mm.
not the legal name. That's what
Yeah.
you mean.
Definitely within interactions. And then if there's a need to specify the legal first name rather than saying it out loud, you know, uh, are you Thomas? It's like that can be jarring for somebody versus there Isabella. And then just be able to point to the screen and say, this is what I have for your legal first name. Is that correct? And then you're not within earshot of other people because this is a public setting, right? And also
Right.
that person doesn't need to be exposed in an auditory way to
Sure.
their first name. So just kind of a bit of a nuance there, because sometimes people are like, we got to specify the legal first name, and sure, that might be the case, but how you do it is really important.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So sort of being just a bit more considerate of
Mm-hmm.
kind of the situation in front of us on an individual basis.
Yeah.
We have a resource
Right.
that could support folks going through this, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a useful resource that we created because there was a gap. Oftentimes, it takes organizations a few years to update their system. Even as simple as adding a second field name can take time. And so, in the
Right.
interim, frontline staff were like, okay, what do? We don't want to keep stepping in this pile. And so, that's where we came up with this navigating system limitations for frontline staff. And essentially, it gives all these tips and tools and tricks that you can use to use the existing system in its limited state to record information and let others know, so that hopefully, a trans person isn't misgendered and or isn't misnamed while the system is being updated. So hopefully that's a useful tool for people to use and leverage in certain situations.
Amazing. I will link that in the show notes too. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we go? I think
Oh my
we've covered
gosh.
quite a lot
No,
more than
we
more than I was
definitely.
expecting.
Yeah, me too. So I think that's good for now. I'm sure people are curious about the specific solutions because often people are very inspired now
Mm-hmm.
knowing the kind of nitty gritty of the difficulties and the challenges, are very much inspired to get into action. Certainly, the interim solutions are helpful, but I very much invite conversations to explore the kind of specific solutions that would work within organizations if they're ready to take those steps. So definitely feel free to reach out to us and explore those options.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kai.
Thank you too, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.